What
Yeah.
we will be discussing is what does an advisor in an early stage cyber vendor space actually do? But before we kick off into it, Evan, are you okay? Just let the audience know a little bit about yourself, if that's okay.
Sure. Well, hey, thanks for having me on, Nick. So Evan Morgan. About a year ago, I founded my own consulting firm, Cyber Defense Army. Been a long time, industry member when it comes to cybersecurity roles in the military, federal government, mostly financial services as my commercial side. For the the specifics within cyber, I've always been kind of the engineer, architect type person running the technologies. And my tagline has always kind of been to give people an easy way to understand what I'm talking about is kind of like the CIO for the CISO has been a lot of my roles, right? So figuring out, hey, what are the different areas within the cybersecurity program need? What are their use cases? Operations, vulnerability management, application security, risk. How do they do that from a technology perspective? So I'm usually like the bits and bytes type guy, figuring out all the different tools and the best things to use. So I've turned that into really an organization today. So I founded my own firm about a year ago, Cyber Defense Army. We're supporting clients from various perspectives. I do a vCISO type service where I'm supporting a couple clients as their in-house CISO. Also, my team supports them from them and a couple of different clients there from a identity access management perspective, cloud security, application security, vulnerability management, and IT risk. So the various kind of areas across the program. So we're a full services consultancy, essentially.
Nice, nice. Okay. As well as all that, obviously, Evan, you're an advisor in the early stage cyberspace as well. So to segue very nicely, I'm just going to leave it as open for you. What does an advisor actually do then? What are you advising on, Evan?
Yeah, great question. So my experience in advisory so far started off when I was essentially the purchaser of a lot of these different tools, right? So we would do a lot of different POCs and bake-offs, and I'd really get an understanding of what are the pain points that folks would have as a purchaser of a lot of these technologies for these large organizations. So a lot of the value that folks see in my background and my experience and what I do now is helping them understand, hey, what is my how's my product fit in the market? What's my ICP, my ideal client profile? Like how would I best position this to go to market? Because I have not just the perspective of an industry buyer and being essentially like a CISO, but I also am owning my own organization and trying to build my own product too, right? So I kind of have the various flavors where I'm going, all right, well, I'm in the position where what would I want to buy versus what would I not want to buy? And also, how do these things work well versus don't work well together? That's really what I think the focus has been as I think about the various organizations I advise for. And you can see a list of those, on my LinkedIn. There are multiple companies. One just got acquired by another really large cyber organization that's in the news as of a week ago. So it's really, big congratulations to them without calling them out by name. But yeah, it's an interesting kind of perspective in various ways because it's not just, hey, you're advising from a sales or marketing perspective or a GTM perspective. You're actually really helping them think about the product, right? So you're almost more of an internal person, but you're still on the outside, right? You're advising, you're helping them think through the big picture, but you're not really part of the team that's building it, but you're giving them ideas and they're kind of iterating on that, and then you're working together over
Okay, so there's loads that I want to pick your brain on.
time.
So
Take away.
yeah, so there's like I say, I'm just thinking where I can start with this one. So firstly, let's keep it on the outside. So with it being sort of an advisory position, is there ever a conflict of interest or time or resource that goes alongside your actual day job? Because, like you say, it's not a full-time position as being an advisor; it's an as well as. So, is there ever a conflict of interest, time, resource, whatever it may be?
I definitely think from a timing perspective, there can be conflicts, right? Not necessarily conflict of interest, but just in general, there's more demand in most of our lives than there is supply when it comes to time. There's
Yeah.
never enough hours in the day. So I think prioritizing that is super important. Like it's easy to say, it's the phrase of some of the most successful in the world know when to say no, right? It's much harder to say no, to turn down opportunities than it is to say yes. So I think that that's really important as folks try to become advisors and are in that position of becoming advisors, that they don't take on too much, right? Because then the value of what you can provide is diminished, right? And then you ultimately don't want to tarnish your brand, so to speak, on, hey, I'm not really getting anything out of this person. I think that's super important. But I think in more in general, when you use the phrase like conflict of interest, I think if you have your own organization, especially, there's some potential conflict. Like I personally, like as I grow my organization, it's been a really great first year. We're about a team of 10 now. I have no desire to be a VAR, a value-added reseller, where it's just like, hey, I've got relationships with everybody and I'll just sell everybody to everybody, right? Like that's not what my organization is. We're focused on getting a lot of value out of the tools that the organizations that we support, our clients, they purchase. So we want to make sure that when we come to them with a recommendation, it's either the right fit for them, or it's truly like, hey, this is my business partner in this space. Like I have a particular partner when it comes to identity and access management, and this is my partner for this space. And I go to market with them, and we do co-branded materials, things like that. But that's more known versus me partnering with 5 different firms and having, potentially conflicts there. And it's pretty common too when you do your advisory contracts to have, the conflicts written out in there on the fact of, hey, you'll be supporting this organization. I won't be picking up another advisory role that's a competitor of yours. I think that's important for folks too, right? Like they want to know, like they can trust you, that you're on the inside with them and not, sharing that information with others. It all comes down to, personal character and stuff, but it's important legally too.
Of course, yeah, of course. And it sounds like there's loads of advantages for the actual company. But what are the actual advantages to yourself of being an advisor, other than, yeah, like you say, that you get to kind of peek behind the curtain at this really cool, early stage security vendor, whatever it might be. What are actually the advantages of being involved?
So I'm a nerd. You probably can tell from my background here. This is truly my room. I love 3D printing. I love Legos. I'm a builder. I like to build things, right? So
Is that what it is? Sorry to stop you in your tracks, but is that what's moving behind you? Is it a
Oh
3D printer?
yeah. I'm
I
printing
wondered
a
what
new
it
helmet
were.
for some of my stuff up here on the wall. Yeah. I'm always printing something. I've got ADHD, man, so I'm always like got 3 or 4 different things I'm trying to juggle. It's a blessing and a curse. But yeah, speaking of which, your question. It wasn't conflict. What was
Yeah, sorry, just to
benefits
go
for me?
back
Yeah.
to the advantages of you being involved as an advisor, yes.
Yeah. Yeah, that's where I did my joking, like I'm a nerd comment. So I love product. I love this space. Like I've always been a technologist. When I was in the military, I was an aircraft mechanic, which is totally not what my space is now. But I joined for 9/11. But if that didn't happen, I would have been in computer science, went to college, would have been the traditional path. Like I just love technology. I have since I was a kid. Built my first Packard Bell 486 when I was like 7 or 8 years old. And it was just, it's fun. I just like really love this space. So cyber became my domain within technology, and being an advisor to these firms and some of the experiences that I've been able to collect over the years from these various organizations and the degrees and certs and just all that type of stuff, I can give that value to them in those experiences. But the value I get is, one, is personal, right? It's just truly, I really love this space. I love the ideas that I'm getting from these other companies. They're like, hey, I talked to one yesterday. I'll refrain from the name, but they're pre-seed, really awesome company coming out of Israel, and they're basically focusing on solving an existing problem in a unique way, but actually isn't another thing where you have to bolt on more stuff. They're actually leveraging what's already there in platforms just in a better way. So it's kind of building a better mousetrap for this problem. And we talked through it, and they were just interested in saying, hey, like, what do you think of the product fit? Like, what do you think of what we're trying to do and how we're trying to solve it? And I was like, well, I mean, it seems like, Kerberos ticket granted ticket from this way. And like, we were kind of talking through it, and I was giving them analogies, and they go, it's exactly what we're trying to do. I was like, that's brilliant. Like, I've never thought of someone solving this particular problem with this particular function. It's not Kerberos or anything, but it's just, that was an analogy that I used. And it just kicked off the conversation really well. Now we're talking about, hey, I may join them as an advisor as they go into seed rounds and they go into, the next phases of fundraising. And it's really more around helping them with the product. There's some GTM sides of it, like how we can
Yep.
do some co-branded marketing, help them grow. I'll benefit from that as a professional side commercially. But really, it's more about finding these awesome relationships with people that are similar to me, that love building things, that love solving problems, and they just really like working in cyber because it's a super unique space and super fast moving space.
Yeah.
So yeah, I would say that's it. Of course, there's sometimes some commercial aspects of it too. On hey, your advisor will cut you in on a certain number of share or stuff like that, which can also lead into some conflicts. So again, you just have to keep everything above board, legally as well as your own personal brand on how you support folks and who you support, and keeping
Yeah.
everything maintained within their organization versus spreading word around to others. That's super important not to do.
Nice, really good point. And you segued at the end very nicely as to where I wanted to take that. And so obviously it sounds personally for you, Evan, that with your background, that you're very, very keen to advise on sort of the R&D, the development of the product. But you kind of inferred that, yes, other advisors might advise on the sort of go-to-market strategies, whatever it might be. It depends on their background. It depends who you bring in, and obviously your skill set. And is that the same for sort of getting involved with VCs as well? Would there be an advisor like, look, I know this VC that are looking for an identity vendor at the moment to kind of take over the US market, or we've got a specific interest in bringing over European Series A's that are ready to sort of break the US market? Is it sort of that can be another segment of the advisory work, but you yourself, you're a builder and you love just like having a look at the new product. Okay, what's about to take over the market? What's the latest AI product that's going to absolutely explode? What's the latest data security posture management tooling that's coming out of Israel that I want to learn more about this new tech stack? Is that sort of where you sit?
You are definitely hitting well on my scenario that I have unfolded. I've been lucky and blessed to have a very good network from over the years on what I've been able to build. And my main client is actually a large venture capital firm, PE, a private equity firm. They are a global firm, but I'm based here in the U.S. They one of their investors I actually support a lot is based in London. So I actually talk with a lot of companies coming out of the EU where they're just like, hey, we're interested in your perspective on this. Like, not from like the financials and all the other stuff, just like, hey, you're a cyber guy. Like, tell me what you think on this. Like, does this make sense? Does it not make sense? Like, what are some opportunities? And we just start kind of kicking it around. Like, we just start talking it through. And meet with the ultimately their prospects to get a little bit of pitch there. Sometimes behind the curtain, sometimes more of the more sales side of things. And I just give them my honest perspective. So it's advising as well. So like I've again totally lucky in this opportunity. Really love working with this client. I'm helping them transform their internal program, but ultimately, as these opportunities come up, it turns into these kind of ad hoc. Hey, I'll just support you on some advisory pieces within your own interest of
Yep.
firms that you're pursuing. So very very lucky there. But yeah, that's a little different than my traditional kind of defined formal advisor roles for some of the tech firms that I advise today.
Okay. So to kind of move it on a little bit, just more on the lines of sort of M&A at this point. So obviously I know that you mentioned that you were that one of the companies that you advised on just obviously went through being bought. Are advisors actually involved in that in any way, shape, or form? Maybe yourself personally, or even if you weren't involved in this one, can advisors actually be involved with them in other instances?
That's a great question too. So from an advisor standpoint, I haven't been involved in M&A discussions. Like for example, the one that I'm talking about, the CEO, who's a close friend, he sent me a text at like 2 a.m. Hey, just want to let you know we're about ready to get bought. Like, thanks so much for being a great member of the team, this and everything. But it was just kind of an announcement she was doing internally for all of us before it hit the news later that morning when all of the news feeds caught it. But M&A, funny enough, my background, before my consultancy with Cyber Defense Army, I was with one of the big four 2 different times. So I saw M&As from that side, supporting companies through mergers and acquisitions, as well as being in a large financials, acquiring companies. So kind of like the different perspectives of being in the industry, as well as kind of consulting through that. I've had some advisory roles where I've helped people think through the cybersecurity aspects of the acquisition or the merger, but not necessarily as a formal advisor, like as part of the advisory programs. And the more I think about it too, like I wouldn't say that I would think that those organizations would seek out that advice from their advisors, especially ones that where they're like, hey, you're engineering, you're cyber, you're tech, like R&D type person, probably not going to say, hey, we're interested in your thoughts on an M&A. And honestly, it's company confidential too, right? Like I'm read in, but at the same time, I'm not like in the inner circle, even knowing, the founders really closely like I do.
Yeah, no, really interesting point, and all makes sense. So now I'm just speaking directly to yourself, Evan, just as you personally. What excites you in the sense of like in the early stage vendor space? Who would you kind of want to speak to? Like you say, you mentioned this vendor coming out of Israel that you're really intrigued about the product, and you're like, okay, cool, this could have some legs in it. If a message was to pop into your inbox, like what tech stacks interest you, what sort of do you do your research in terms of like, okay, the product, the current staff that's on the payroll at the moment in terms of the what they've done in the past. What do you actually look for to actually accept the meeting and be like, let's hear you guys out?
That's a really good question. I will say that unfortunately I get more DMs in LinkedIn than I can usually respond to. So there is a filter for sure. And if I have to sit here and think about kind of what do I use when I filter out kind of messages that I don't have the ability to respond to everyone. I think the level of connectedness that those folks have with some of the folks that I have also is kind of an insight, right? The guys that I was just talking about yesterday, when we were kind of talking a little bit, lo and behold, they were on some of the same flights with some of the same other founders that I advise for today, in the same circles. Didn't even realize we were in the same circles. So I think LinkedIn has been a really awesome platform to be able to connect folks that otherwise you wouldn't connect with, unless somebody in between automatically is like, hey, I want to connect you with X person, like back in the day before we had social media. I think it's rapidly accelerated the ability for folks to connect with folks like we wouldn't otherwise. Like you and I, we connected on LinkedIn and we were chatting, and that's how we have this conversation here. But otherwise, I don't know if I would ever have a 3-degree connection to you, right? Where it's like, hey, I know somebody who knows Nick, and Nick knows somebody who knows me. So I think the level of familiarity is something that I use. But also if it's interesting or not, right? Like it doesn't have to be, the person doesn't have to have certain degrees or accolades or have worked for certain organizations. Like I know that that's important in a lot of ways where folks are like ex Google, ex Microsoft, ex Amazon, or whatever. Like that's great. I've got some names too, but I don't think that really matters as much. Like those are just some unique experiences you have. But in reality, if you're trying to get me to join you for a conversation and potentially advise on your product, I want to know about your problem. I want to know about the solution you have to fix that problem. I want to know if that is that even interesting enough for me to go, hey, this is my sweet spot. I love this space. I'm happy to dig in. Like let's go. Versus really don't, like, this is something that's not really me. It's like it's not really for me. Like I appreciate the interest, but it's not really for me, right? So I think that's the key. But really whether you're cold or warm when you're coming in is whether we have some level of connectedness already, outside of directly.
Yeah, absolutely. No, it makes sense. And between me and you, just as a side point to this, just as a story for myself, like you say, there's so many different subsectors in the space, whether it's like AppSec, CloudSec, DataSec, Identity AI, whatever it might be. But the one that's just the flavor of the month for me, God, I'll probably watch this back in 3 months and I'm like, that's not my flavor of the month anymore. But I really love the security ratings and investment space at this moment in time, like companies that and products that essentially look and quantify the risk of a security posture, looks at all your toolings and actually quantifies the risk to a CEO. It's just really piquing my interest at the moment because I'm like, yeah, you're bringing a cultural problem of security, and you go into a CEO and you're speaking in them terms to them, because like say like for years we've had to battle with the CEOs to like, okay, this is what security does, but finally we're getting, seems to be like a little sub vertical that's expanding now and it's growing, and it's kind of like the bridge between security into the boardroom. Like, look, we'll speak in your terms. This is how much your risk is costing you, and this is how it can be ran more efficiently. I just like speaking to companies in this space at this moment because I'm like, I like your product. I think it's got massive runway. I just think it's really cool as well. And then you start throwing AI into it, and then you're having conversations about, okay, can you throw AI into looking at your security posture? And then that opens up the debate of, what if you don't throw it into it? Then you're probably going to be behind. Anyway, I'm going to stop myself before I go into a rabbit hole, Evan, and maybe we can carry that on the Cyber After Hours podcast. Maybe we'll kind of plug
Yeah,
that at
sounds
the
good.
end anyway. But yeah, to get back on topic before I go any further down my rabbit hole. So, obviously, my next question was, okay, if you are a cybersecurity vendor or cybersecurity consultancy, whatever it may be, at what stage do you start to open the door to advisors? Is it as early as pre-seed, or can it be as late as sort of Series C, Series D? Is there actually a timeline or any rule on opening the door to advisors?
That's a really great question too, and I would have, I think, less of a would have a different perspective versus yesterday, right? So I was chatting with these gentlemen, and they are pre-seed, and they're looking to add advisors. They said they have a few right now, and I was like, all right, pre-seed. So like this is really getting in on the ground floor, really helping craft how this product's going to look, how it's going to feel, how it's going to go to market, which is awesome. I at first was like, maybe a little too early, right? I thought, my thoughts before yesterday would have been, hey, probably pre-seed's probably a little too early, right? Because ultimately you need some level of capital to start to build. You start getting the seed round, Series A, and then it starts going, all right, how do we start to scale this concept that we've kind of refined enough? But I think the fact that it's more of a solution to a problem, but it is conceptual at this point, I think that's even more fun, to be honest, right? Because then there's more to work with, more levers to pull, so to speak, on how you craft this. But then another firm that is kind of more, it's not listed on my LinkedIn, but is just finished their Series D, very large in I'll avoid saying any more specifics. So it's just giving the confidentiality that they want. They just finished their Series D, and I just became an advisor to them right around the same time. So I think that there's definitely a various flavor there as far as when advisors can join, when they should join. But I think it really comes down to the company on who they need, how those advisors can help them. Are they folks that it's truly just kind of connections and they can help them grow their bottom line and grow their pipeline? Or are they really kind of more R&D focused advisors, or more sales kind of go to market type advisors, right? There's lots of different kind of perspectives. And, we're talking about tech firms and startups. Typically you have some level of VC funding, right? Or PE funding. They're, from what I've seen, it being in this world, they're vastly different. Like the client that I have that I support, they're an amazing organization. Like they have all of these different centers of excellence to ultimately help companies basically grow, become these amazing companies. While other VCs are just, hey, here's the check, here's your check, and we expect our amount, we expect certain sales metrics, and go to town. Like that's essentially the difference between kind of night and day on what you can get between different VCs. So yeah, it's a very interesting space. I've really enjoyed the flexibility of what owning my own firm and being able to work with all these different organizations has allowed me to do over the last year.
Nice. Evan, I'm a little bit distraught that we've come to our time, because this has been one of the fastest podcasts that I've done in pretty much my 70 to 80 pods that I've now done. But yeah, we've pretty much come to our time, but I will absolutely love to do a round two on this. But yes,
Yeah, sounds
so
great.
to kind of summarize, if anybody has any questions for Evan, or would like to learn more about obviously the Cyber Defence Army, if you ever need sort of a need for any VC sewing work or any consultancy work, I'll be sure to put Evan's information down below. And let me just highlight to everyone that Evan actually runs a podcast of his own as well, called the Cyber After Hours podcast. They have, am I right in thinking you've released 2 episodes, but you've recorded 8, so it's absolutely by the time this has been released, go over to their page and check them out. They will have a ton of pods for you to check out. But yes, Evan, thank you once again for coming on the Security Space podcast.
Thank you, Nick. It's been a pleasure.